All right, the rumors were true. The rumors about possible weapon tuning was true, and even tweets that were talking about how this could, in fact, change the meta were accurate. You know, there was a moment during the season, right around whenever the first kind of talks were made about transferring the league to online, and I said something in particular, and I said for CDL teams, keep good relations with your AR players. Keep good relations with your flex players. You don't want to lose a relationship with your flex player because you may need them soon, right? Guys that were not in their role because of how good the MP5 was, it wasn't their fault, right? I mean, they were being told to play a role that was totally different than what they were used to. You see, whenever I made that comment, I was under the impression that we would have this patch around that time. I was under the impression that when we transferred to online, that we would have one of those groundbreaking patches kind of toward the middle of the season, right? I was under the impression that much like every other or many other Call of Duty titles that we would have, that there would be a major point in time where a major weapon change would occur. I was not under the impression, however, that with only 2 months left before the final event of the season, that there would be a major patch at this point. And you know, this really kind of gets back to the old conversation of competitive value. And listen, I very much am aware, and have been for a while, competitive Call of Duty is not a high percent of the average Call of Duty fan base. Listen, I understand that, right? But this year has showcased that despite the franchising decision-making, that we are a lot farther behind than I thought. A lot farther behind than we should be. Certain aspects of year one, they've been great, right? But there needs to be a system in play that can be adaptable for competitive. And I'm not here to say this patch is bad, right? But what I am here to say, for example, is that this patch was long overdue and is solely being catered to the average player. And I'm not here to say that competitive Call of Duty should take over priority as one of the biggest gaming franchises of all time. I'm not saying that they should take over the high majority of attention from what is a billion-dollar company. As much as I would like to say that, it's not what I'm saying. But listen for a second. The moment franchising became official was the moment that Activision signed their name on the dotted line under responsibility, right? Esports earned a seat for once at the Call of Duty table this year. A franchise league composed from those who make the game. But despite esports having that seat at the table, they've yet to be served. And it has yet to be tended to the way that it's supposed to. And we're talking solely about the game, by the way. We're not talking about anything else. We are solely talking about the game. And when you make decisions, and what we're talking about here, which is delay decisions because of the average player, it hurts the franchise league that you've put forth. Listen, folks, I went to a public match game. I guess this was around 2 weeks ago. Right? Around 2 weeks ago, I went to a public match game. And the only thing that I heard out of the kind of public chatter, the multiplayer chatter, was about how great the MP5 was. That was the major conversation that my team was having. I got into multiple games, played pretty much the entire day. The big conversation that the average fan was having, according to my multiplayer experience, was, wow, the MP5 is great. Wow, the MP5 is amazing. They were under the same awareness that competitive has been for, or rather that competitive has had for a while. This isn't just something minor that needs to be fixed. It's right out in the open, right? You pick up the MP5 and you realize how great it can be, not just in close range, but also at long range. It's not hard to understand. And if you watch the CDL, you can see it clear as day, right? There are 3, if not 4 MP5s on the map at all times, depending on the map or mode type of situation. Changing the meta in what seems to be a major way not long before the biggest event in Call of Duty esports history, it's not a great look, right? And I can promise you that this wouldn't nearly be as big of a deal if there were prior patches. But the fact that this happens now, after 80% of the game, or after 80% of this title's life cycle has taken place, it's hard to defend, right? And I at times, I have come to I don't want to say the rescue, but I've come to the allegiance at times of what titles have to do, or what Call of Duty, for example, has to do, the CDL, for example. But this one's hard to defend, right? It is. And this also wouldn't nearly be as big of a deal if adjustments to the title were made throughout the year. And we're talking spawns, game mechanics, map adjustments, you name it, right? This patch is by no means the core problem, but it is just one of the many issues that have been, rather, one of the many issues that have yet to be resolved despite stepping into the first franchise year. Now, we don't know how influential this patch is going to be, as it literally just broke last night. But as we take a look at a few aspects, we'll kind of gain more of an understanding. So if you're looking at this patch from a competitive Call of Duty side, there's three main things that you want to address. The first being, and probably the most defined, the MP5, right? Decreased damage range, decreased the 10 millimeter damage range, reduced long range damage to 10 millimeter ammo, slight recoil increase to 10 millimeter ammos. Snipers as well need to be talked about. AX50, increased damage range, the HDR guaranteed one hit to lower torso at any range. And finally, no stock attachment, increased weapon recoil, decreased ADS, aiming steadiness. All right, so major tuning done on the MP5 and 10mm massively combines to make this weapon not nearly as strong as it previously was before, right? I mean, this gun, if you've used it, if you've watched it, you know how good it can be, and you know how consistent that it can be from ranges and with the right attachments locked on with it. You're also, in my eyes, after kind of seeing these notes specifically, I think we're going to see other weapons start to be looked at. I think when it comes to the SMG's future, we're going to start to see a few others start to be worked around with. Most likely like the Uzi. We've seen the MP5 be looked at times. I think the Uzi is probably the more common of the two, and I think that one will most likely be looked at more heavily and probably will start to kind of come into the meta depending on different teams and depending on how the MP5 plays now with a lot of these major changes. In terms of snipers, more consistent. I'm kind of okay with that. This might be kind of more toned toward multiplayer stuff, which is fine, but for competitive, I'll take it, and especially with certain teams, certain players having unfortunate hit markers from time to time, I'm cool with this. Now, one thing that I don't think a lot of people are talking about enough, it's kind of solely MP5. Big thing, though, at least for competitive, no stock, right? Major changes done with this one, also major changes done with this attachment as well, and I'd say that in combination with the MP5 nerf have the ability to really slow down this game a lot. No stock pretty much allowed for AR players to be much more mobile, so not only have you taken that away, but you also have very well just limited the best gun in the game, which happens to be an SMG. Now, I like this patch. I think this very much has the ability to change up the game a very decent amount. My only issue is the timing of it, obviously. There have been many how do you want to say this? There have been many kind of moments throughout the season where teams and players have called for the MP5 to receive a nerf, so I don't think there's really any complaints with that. It's just the timing and for how long that we have seen this weapon be kind of in the metaphor. And when it comes down to other SMGs, like I mentioned, we've already seen players like Envoy, the Chicago Huntsman, start to experiment with the Uzi here and there. There were numerous pro players that were trying out the Uzi last night when it came down to 10s, and it very well could take over as the #1 SMG. It could even be paired alongside the MP5, depending on the map. Now, another thing that we do need to consider is that ARs just got a lot more common, right? I think even with this game being slowed down, AR players and teams with more ARs are actually probably going to benefit more from this. Like I said, it kind of depends on the maps. This is definitely going to be a learning period, but teams and players that have kind of been toned, if you will, to the MP5, who probably would prefer to have an AR in their hands, flexes who have managed to see more success or their teams have seen more success, those guys that are still on those teams are probably going to start to run with that more often. And I think teams in general will start to pick up the M4 at a more common rate. Now, a few teams that I'm actually pretty interested in to watch with this new patch. First of all, for me, it's got to be the Minnesota Rocker, right? Gutter X and Assault, these two together on the Rocker. probably wouldn't mind slowing things down. Granted, kind of based off the Rockers' recent history, you'd like to think that them kind of changing up the meta, changing up the pace, allowing for them to be more methodical, which is probably the reason why we saw them have as much success at the start of the title. They're probably okay with this game slowing down, as I believe they have Alex back in the lineup, which is great to see, but hopefully he doesn't have to hurt his thumb as much when it comes down to things. So Minnesota Rocker, I think they probably like the way that this is going. They like the way that they can kind of slope the game down. Gutterex has the ability to do that and hopefully get back to the start of the game performance that he was having. Another roster that I think is pretty happy with this is the Chicago Huntsmen, right? They're going to like this. Arcitys and Formal as main ARs previously. They have a history with these weapons. I think strengthening Formal only helps this team. We've already seen, like we said, multiple players from Chicago Huntsmen, specifically Envoy, start to kind of work with the OUTY. You could argue kind of how this impacts Prestini, but I think in terms of the core of this roster, and I think allowing for Arcitys to get to a higher level now with ARs kind of back in the game, only allows for the Chicago Huntsmen to most likely see more success, and we're talking all of this on paper, obviously. One other team that I'm super excited to watch is we'll get into a few others. Dallas Empire, right? I'm actually very interested to see exactly how this team, kind of known for their SMGs as of recently, because of how great that they've been looking. I think the Empire are actually kind of cool with slowing the game down as well. I think guys like Clayster and Crimsix are really going to start to benefit, especially if they can make this team more roundly consistent. I think would be great. Another team that's going to benefit, London Royal Ravens, right? Interested to watch this roster. Wuskin can kind of start to take over again. You've got a guy in Shawnee who obviously has main AR history. I think you're going to see guys like Scraps and probably Zero try out the M4 from time to time and see how it kind of works for them. OGLA, right? You've got 3 players on this team who have run main AR in their history, or at least enjoy running in AR in some capacity. Slasher, Chino, and Dashi. This meta very well might have saved this team, because we know that there have been arguments around the main AR between Slasher and Dashi throughout a majority of the season. There's been arguments about lack of practice, lack of interest, and this patch might have just kind of helped save the rest of their season, not only just because of the meta, but because players are going to be more comfortable in the roles that they're going to run, most specifically if Dashi has the M4 in his hands, which we'll see if it will be more of a 3 AR type setup, but I think they have the ability to benefit. And one last team that I think is very interesting to watch in terms of a positive, that no one's really going to talk about all that much, Paris Legion, right? This is a team that loves slowing the game down, a very methodical roster, kind of similar to the Rocker in terms of early success. Rocker obviously have seen much more success than Paris Legion, but just in general, this is a team that's going to enjoy slowing the game down. They've already tried putting Luca on the main AR from time to time, having that consistent duo, if you will, between him and Dens together, mixed in with maybe a guy like Shocks trying out the AR from time to time will probably be a good thing for them. So I think those are the rosters kind of in particular that kind of stick off the page to me as teams that I'm interested to see now with the changes. Now, one thing interesting, and not specifically talking on negatives, but a few rosters that you could argue they're going to be interesting to watch for the future are actually the top 2 teams right now in the game. The first team, obviously, being the roster that has won back-to-back championships, that being the Florida Mutineers, right? A major positive behind this team has been how lights out that they have been because of their aggression, right? We talk about that infamous Hackney domination that they have versus FaZe. It was aggression. It was fantastic 1v1 engagements. It was just overall a very talented, fast-moving team. Like I said, their aggression was probably one of the most impressive things they have about them. They do have capable AR players, right? We've seen Awakening try it before. We know Pharaoh is comfortable with an AR in his hands. It's just a matter of them being able to translate and possibly and most likely having to slow their game down. Depending on the speed change, this very well could impact them. Another team, like we said, in terms of what could be Atlanta FaZe, right? You have your ARs, Major Maniac, and Celium. I'm interested to see how this impacts FaZe a lot, actually. Obviously, they're known for their aggression and what they can do up close. I will say I'm not as worried about FaZe as I am possibly worried about the Florida Mutineers, just because Atlanta FaZe, you've got 2 guaranteed SMG players, right? Abizi and Simp. And the one thing that I love about this roster, a guy who has by no means had the greatest of kind of recent play, is Priesta. A guy who, in Black Ops 4, pretty much played every single role in a matter of 3 months. He ran the main AR, he ran the Maddox, he ran the SOG, he could do whatever the team needed. And I think if he can actually change up his play style, maybe play more methodical with the M4, it actually could help this team out a lot. I'm not sure exactly with this team in particular how it's going to slow down the pace. And we know how they play in hardpoint. We know kind of their consistency when it comes down to it. But I don't think it's going to impact teams, or rather, it's going to impact them as a team as much as people think. Again, it depends on the meta. It depends on a lot of factors that we're about to find out. But again, some early opinions. I think we do see a slowed down game, one that definitely will impact certain teams. I think we'll see a mixture of MP5 and OUTY depending on the map and kind of depending on how many ARs that are going to be on the map as well. I think no stock is definitely something to keep in mind, or at least the no stock adjustments. It's going to slow the game down a fair amount. Some maps really have the ability to make you kind of pay for your aggression, and I think this has the ability to be highlighted a lot more as well. We very well might have a much different game after today, which makes the road to champs that much more interesting.